Thank you so much for the introduction, Steffi, and thank you, George Labs, for inviting me. Yeah, it's quite humbling to speak after such a showmaster like him. And I just learned backstage that he was actually involved in the project, which I will be talking about today. So that's quite exciting to find out how many people here are connected, right? So I want to make the case today about how we enhanced UX maturity at Deutsche Bank while we were designing apps and services for the next generation, for the masses, for millions of customers. But first, before I take you on this journey, I want to show you a newspaper article from mid of this year. How Deutsche Bank's 13-year attempt to kill off an IT system finally worked. Wow, 13 years. That's a long time. Why I really like this headline is because it summarizes the objective of the project I will be talking about and the history, also before our design team joined this challenge. This was not the only article which was written about that project. There were many more. Some of them were positive, some of them were negative. Few of them were more nuanced than the first one I showed you. But more importantly, what you probably can guess, there were many different opinions from customers, and there was a huge impact on our customers with this project. But how did we get here? For those of you who are not familiar with Deutsche Bank has branches around the world, not only the presence in Germany, but also in the US, in Singapore, in India, and many European countries. The different divisions of Deutsche Bank are in investment banking, private banking, retail banking. So Deutsche Bank has many different divisions. I will be talking today about what we did in the so-called New Banking Initiative, which is a collaboration between the Deutsche Bank Private Bank and our infrastructure part of Deutsche Bank, which is called Technology, Data, and Innovation. Deutsche Bank works together with not only private and retail customers, but also with corporations around the world. And then there's Postbank, which was acquired by Deutsche Bank in 2008. Postbank has its presence mainly in retail and what you could call brick-and-mortar banking in Germany. And when both of these brands combined, it was a culture clash programmed. The Spiegel called it in 2008, two different worlds are colliding with Deutsche Bank's takeover of Postbank. But under the umbrella of Deutsche Bank, there are more different brands than just the two I showed you just now. Attached to Deutsche Bank is Norris Bank, a direct and online-only bank, which is specifically targeting ease of use and hassle-free banking. But there is also First coming from the side of Postbank, which is targeting startups and small business owners. And there are even more brands. So what was the mission of the project I will be talking today? The mission was to combine the IT systems of Deutsche Bank and Postbank, which resulted in one of the biggest IT migration projects in Europe ever, with a customer base of 18 million customers, consisting of 50 billion data sets. And this was our design team back in 2019 when we took over this challenge. Everyone had their own strengths and passions. Outside of our design team, people often thought us to be working on the colors and the pixels, right? The surface level, the interface. Our front ends back then were quite mixed, and they were quite different from another, not only in the code bases, but also when it came to appearance and interaction. When it came to user research, this was mainly our way to go. We did in-person usability testings, often down the hall, guerrilla style, with non-branded prototypes. And besides usability testing, we had analytics as a way to gather data and insights about our customers. Wasn't that much to tackle such a big project. And then, as you know, in the beginning of 2020, Corona also changed the way we worked massively. So it's fair to say that we felt as if we would be in the dark. We knew we had to consider how we work together with the developers in an agile fashion, how we could make lean UX happen, how we could make multi-branding going with all the different brands, which were now combined under one technical umbrella. Design systems, of course, were a major part in driving multi-branding efforts from our side. Communication and UX writing is quite important if you think about so many different customers which are using your platform. But most importantly to me was the field of user research. All of these different topics became work in progress for us. Today, I want to bring some learnings to you. Some of these learnings we introduced right away into our workflow, and some we learned the hard way. I want to talk about them because I want to bring value to you, and maybe some of them will help you along your projects. The first learning I want to talk about is create assessments for your peers, for your stakeholders, for your managers, because you know the best which roles are necessary, which tools are necessary, and which informations and deliverables you need to tackle that project. Which processes have to be initiated. So as I said, all of these topics became work in progress, and today I want to focus on user research. To combine the IT systems of Deutsche Bank and Postbank. What can we mention about this goal? It's quite development focused. So our question was, what's about the customer? I introduced the 4 different brands to you. And when we look at the brands, we mentioned that there is not that much overlap in the customer base. So in order to make our stakeholders aware of that fact, we knew we had to provoke empathy. We invited product owners and project leads and BAs to show unexpected outcomes of user research, to highlight the difference between our customer groups, and to warn everyone, even designers and researchers, of expert bias. Here's some quotes we gathered from interviews or other sources from customers of these different brands. In a moderated usability testing, a customer of Deutsche Bank asked, how do I invest my 7-digit wealth and make it future-proof? A first customer said, my employees and contractors need to get their money in time, no delay allowed. Which struck me quite hard in an interview was a quote by an interviewee, and she said she has to think about every euro she spends because she inherited debt and she needs to repay that debt every month. And customers from Norris Bank expected us that the banking would be simple and straightforward without any hidden fees. Okay. So how did we get along? We carried out interviews and unmoderated testings. We ran qualitative analysis on this data, and we iterated based on the qualitative findings. We ramped up this approach during the project and tried to establish it. But for everyone who shared insights from sessions like those with stakeholders, you're maybe familiar with this question. How reliable is it if we only ask 6 to 15 people? Right? This was the reaction of many product owners whom we presented our findings. And I want to say it's understandable. If you carry out such a project, you carry also some risk. and you want to manage that risk. So we understood that we had to evolve user research even further. We had to raise quantitative data. We had to complement the qualitative through the quantitative. This would allow us to benchmark between competitors, iterations, and teams, and if needed, we could calculate the statistical significance in order to increase the reliability for the launch. And this would also add us the potential to calculate the return on invest of design, to prove the value of design. So then our data also looked like this. We complemented qualitative through quantitative. So my talk today is just a glimpse of a massive project with hundreds and thousands of tickets being worked on, hours spent in talks together, finding the best approach, also dealing with legacy software inside of the bank and IT systems in the bank. So my talk is today about the glimpse of design in user research. But I want to say a big thank you to every one of my colleagues who worked tirelessly in bringing a positive impact to our customers from the different brands. So in the beginning of that year, it was finally time for launch. We had a staggered migration of 12 million customers to our new front and back ends. We were touching almost every IT system in the bank. We had longer outages than expected on some front ends, and also issues with special account types and processes. But we also introduced new features such as photo transfer, and finally, our Postbank customers have access to mobile payment. New features now get implemented quicker, and our app rating improved to 4.3 stars since the initial launch. But along all of these outcomes, we also released new internal front ends to our employees. Our design team grew quite a bit. And that's just a part of our design team now. Our front ends became more aligned through the use of design systems and multi-branding. Some front ends will be upcoming in the next years. But importantly to me, also our ways to gather data about our customers evolved quite a bit. So now we have access to many more methods to find out about the motivation, wishes, desires, and problems of our users. During 2 years of remote user research in the times of COVID, we carried out hundreds of unmoderated and moderated sessions and dozens of studies. We focused mainly on qualitative user research, but we introduced quantitative user research methods as well, which increased velocity in decision-making and created confidence in testing proposals. But also, the way that our colleagues looked at the design profession changed. Now we were perceived as basing our opinion on behavioral data, customer feedback, market evaluation, and our own expertise as designers. We provide recommendations for action to product responsible parties within our area. But today I want to finish my talk with one last learning, is that with all the different change initiatives you are part of, and that all the politics surrounding these projects, please don't lose yourself. Stay true to yourself. Know what you enjoy and practice it. Stay a designer. It's a way of observing and thinking about the world. Thank you.
Niels, thank you so much. And we already have some online questions for you.
Sure.
So, do you believe that the UX maturity can be improved bottom up or only top down? Or how do you see this? Where does it come from?
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question, because we are at that point as well where we think about ways of actually doing both. So we see as it the way that you have to work from both sides. You have to prove, for example, with pilot projects, that you can actually deliver on the promises you make from a user research and design point of view. But of course, also management and executives should know about the value of design. So I think you can leverage different parties involved to do best both at the same time.
I think that's a good approach. A few people wanted to know what tools did you use to interpret the qualitative data, if you are allowed to share this?
Yeah, I'm allowed to share this. So with qualitative data, we mainly relied on methods, not really tools. And we used basically online whiteboarding to carry out affinity mapping, for example, where we clustered different quotes from customers or also behavioral clues into topics. And then we were able to focus on those different topics. So we didn't really use a tool per se, so that's fine for me, no secrecy.
Then I would say let's take some questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Thank you. One question, if would have been for you the only one choosing, would you have done the quantitative research or you would have stayed on the qualitative? Did you learn something more on the quantitative part? Because I think the qualitative was perfect, enough to work on.
Yeah. You mean if I would have to choose from one of those?
No, if you would have been the one decided, would have been, because I think you have done the quantitative because the project manager wanted.
Okay.
They just didn't want to change. They force you to do the quantitative because they just didn't want it to change. So if it would be for you, would have done the quantitative or just the qualitative was enough and you would just ramp it up?
No. So I think, as I said, asking for quantitative data is reasonable. So not only project managers or product owners are part of a project which should be successful on the market, and you want to know this while you are designing, before you are launching. But also us as designers are part of the project, and we also want it to be successful. So of course, you have a different emotional momentum with qualitative research. You are there with customers, you see their reactions, you confront your design in a qualitative session in a different way, and you can also train your empathy, right? Look at clues from their behavior, from their attitude. But I think also for designers, it's good to know that we are on the right track, and you can do this often better with quantitative methods.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for that talk. I was wondering, how did you prepare your user base for the outages that happened when you pulled the plug, when you merged? And how did you react on the that it was taking longer than expected?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would say it that way, that if you work for a really big corporation, you might have a longer reaction time than a startup if you find something in the market isn't going well, right? So what I would recommend to all of you out there, leverage beta testing for the projects you are going to launch. So I personally had good experiences with beta groups, but when it came to the actual launch of our project now, to answer your question, I think it went along that we either observed something in our tracking tools for the App Store and Play Store, and we clustered there also the findings with affinity mapping and basically tagging different quotes, and then we told the product owners or the chief product owner, hey, those were the topics which were mentioned most often. We should focus on those. But of course, the feedback is already there, right? And this dissatisfaction is sometimes done. So ideally, you want to prevent that. And that's why we are also making the argument for quantitative involvement of user research methods. And as I said, establishing beta groups much more deeply in our product development so that we can avoid it from the beginning.
Any other questions here? Because then I would take one last one from the remote audience.
Sure.
People wanted to know from you, what do you think is the biggest learning that legacy banks can take away from neobanks? Is there something that we could take as inspiration, aspiration?
So I cannot speak for every neobank, but I think when it comes to the culture of startups in general, is that you have a quick cycle time between observing and designing. And sometimes it can get messy in a startup. Some startups use overtime maybe, or just work a bit different than a legacy bank, I think, in different ways. But what still is really positive about the way startups work, and some of them are neobanks or they are just now establishing themselves, is that you have these rapid iterative cycles in the product development, not just in designing, but in observing, redesigning, refactoring, and then launching again. I think in the digital space, this is really important. And you have all of these different parts of that iterative cycle have also different professions involved, so they need to be established as well. Sometimes that's a part which is, I think, sometimes missing.
Right.
Yep.
Niels, thank you so much.
Thank you.